Carbon dioxide in your aquarium. Is it needed? Is it essential? Is it a luxury? Is it a faff? The answer is probably yes, maybe, probably no. Could be to all of those questions. So I wanted to talk about it a little bit. If you really want to understand carbon dioxide and how it's used in the aquarium, there's probably too much for me to get into this, and the best video on this has already been made.
Hey FishTube, Stephen here.
My friend Stephen P 2003 has already made what I think is the best video, covering everything about CO2, why it's important, why it's something that you shouldn't necessarily dismiss as just unnatural. So I'm going to leave a link down in the description to that one. Please go and check that out. But this video is going to be about setting up a new CO2 system, whether you're using a big massive tank like this or one of the other options that you can use. We'll talk a little bit about it and how to get the best out of it and how to do it safely. For me, I'm not a purist. I don't want to instruct you that one way is right and one way is wrong. No way might be the right way for you. This tank here has never had any CO2 injected in it, and it's one of my most lush tanks that I've ever had. So it's definitely not required for everything. But that's not to say this tank doesn't need CO2. It absolutely does. Every tank needs CO2 for the plants to grow. What I'm talking about is CO2 injection and trying to maybe supercharge, or one of those other wrong terms to use about how to get the best growth or aid the growth of those plants. So we'll assume I'm going to use CO2, so we'll assume you are too. Let's start backwards, shall we? There's how do we get it into the aquarium? The main way, you might have seen things like this, where we've got a CO2 diffuser like this. Some gas will be pumped down here, go through a little stone piece which will diffuse the gas into tiny, tiny bubbles. The reason for that is the way we get it into our aquarium is we increase the amount of time the CO2 can be in contact with the water in the bubble form before it gets to the top and pops off into the atmosphere. So things like this create hundreds and thousands of tiny little bubbles, giving hundreds of thousands of tiny little chances for something to escape into the aquarium water before it escapes into the atmosphere. Other things you might have seen are things like this, a CO2 ladder, where it will have slightly larger bubbles, but they'll spend a long time in the water, going up and down, well, mostly up, back and forward, that's what I should have said, before it gets to the top and then pops off into the atmosphere. So the longer that bubble of CO2 has got surface area touching the water, the more chance it has to get into the water. Other things you might see are like bells, where once a day you'll fill it up and the CO2 will just sit there and slowly be dissipated into the water over the day. And so that one big bubble with one big bit of surface area just spends a long time in contact with the water, rather than lots of tiny bubbles spending a short time. Different ways to do the same sort of thing. There are many and varied ways to do CO2 injection. Whether you start with something like an aerosol can that you just manually fill once a day, whether you use something like this, a SodaStream bottle, or the big old bottle that I talked about earlier. There's no right and wrong ways. Different situations for different people will always work out best. The one I didn't mention was the reactor, where you have something that's in line, where the CO2 spends a lot of time going round and round in a reactor before the bubble gets anywhere near a chance to escape into the atmosphere. So it's all about efficiency, really. There are, of course, DIY versions that you can use with some old plastic bottles, some sugar, some yeast, which will create CO2. There are kind of in-between steps where the same sort of thing, but a bit fancier. This is the Fluval Bio CO2, but it's the same idea. You put your ingredients in here, it naturally creates CO2, and then it comes with all the fittings and stuff that you need to be able to do the things you need to do to control it properly. So many options of putting CO2 in your tank. And again, it's often about efficiency and what you specifically want to get out of it. One of the things I remember being told a while back was that it doesn't really matter. Any amount of CO2 going into an aquarium, even if it's not optimal, is helping. As long as you don't go overboard, because that can hurt. In this video, I'm setting up a new pressurized system with my big tank. So we'll talk you through that. So the other end of the system is where the gas starts from. I mean, you might be getting cylinder envy, but you definitely don't need something this size. I just happened to luck into, there's a place very close to me that sells cylinders, does refills, and they happen to have this one going and offered me it for a very good price. The place is a CO2 supplier for pubs and things like that, or sometimes if you look for airsoft places and paintball places, they often do CO2 refills. So where you get your starting tank is not really important. It could be a fire extinguisher, it could be whatever it is. You just need some way of controlling the release of this gas, and that's usually something like this, a regulator of some form. These are called dual stage regulators because what you want to do is be able to measure how much gas is in the tank, how much gas are you letting out. If you get a single stage one, you get what is called the fear of end of tank dump, where sometimes, I don't fully understand it, but when you get almost to the bottom of your CO2 supply, it decides to just dump the whole lot into your tank and kill all your fish. And nobody wants that. So I would recommend at least getting a dual stage regulator, something like this. This is the one that I have used for years and years and years. It has worked flawlessly. But now that I want to set up multiple tanks using CO2, I've ran into a bit of a sticky problem of how to manage the delivery of the CO2 to each of the tanks. As always with everything we do on this channel, budget was a bit of a concern for me, so I ended up trying something to use, which is essentially an air valve, siliconing it up to make it as airtight as possible, but just using this and the air valve and the little 4 or 5 gang controller to control the air delivery into each tank. So what I've done is the big tank comes into this then goes into each one of these. This is a bubble counter. This is essentially what determines or lets you see how much CO2 you're putting into each tank, and a needle valve on top of that. This is ideal. The needle valve gives you the fine control. The big valve on the big CO2 thing lets you put something out. This makes you really easy to control what you've going, but these that are compatible with this, was finding it very difficult to find all these, so I was trying to do fine control with this and it just wasn't working. You may have seen in one of my earlier videos a line exploded. That was because of this Heath Robinson setup I was trying to use, so please don't do this. I mean, do it if you want, but I won't be responsible for something going wrong. I basically wasted an entire refill of CO2 because a line popped off in the middle of the night and I didn't notice, and I came back and the tank was empty. Thankfully I didn't have any problems where it released everything into a tank, because that can be catastrophic, but it's not ideal. So I'm trying to upgrade this a little bit, and I'm upgrading it with something that's kind of built for this purpose. So this is an F-zone regulator and multiple tank all in one solution. So cost 150 quid or whatever it was, so not cheap. I've kind of not done the budget thing, but I think it's important that every now and then you spend a bit of money. So the idea here is that it comes straight out of here, goes through your regulator which can control everything, and then you have, it comes with 2 and I've bought an extra one because I want to do 3. In theory you can just keep extending this, but I've been told off by Stephen P that it might not work past this. So this will get me 3, which is a good enough start, and then each one of these has a needle valve control underneath for that fine control. So in theory it's a much neater solution and should be a much better solution. This bit here connects to this, and then we should be good to go. So it should just be a case of offering it up, hand tightening the nut, and then wrench tightening it properly. Should give us a decent seal. And that, in effect, is us all set up. So this also includes a solenoid, which I think is, you might call it a luxury, but basically you don't want to run your CO2 24/7. So a solenoid valve like this allows you to set a timer to turn it on and off. You want to only run CO2 when you're running your lights, basically. So that's it attached properly, and we've filled up each of these reservoirs for the bubble counters. And in theory what should happen is this dial here should tell me that this isn't empty when I turn it on. As you can see, that has flipped up. So that's on, that's fine, and that's controlling what's coming out of here. And then if I turn on this valve, which controls what gets released, as you can see, hopefully that will start to climb. And I just want to get it into this green zone here. Start low is what I always say. So it's just touching that green zone there. And then if the solenoid's on, I control the fine delivery individually in each of these by the valve down here, which you can see. You'll often hear people talking about how many bubbles they run. So it's bubbles per second, 1 or 2 bubbles per second. Again, I would caution you to start everything very, very conservatively. So like 1 bubble a second is fine to get you going, and then ramp up as you see fit. But that is essentially how that's going to work. These will then feed into the individual tanks that I want to apply my CO2 to. CO2. If you take nothing away from this video other than this bit that I'm about to talk about now, then I think I've done my job. Start slow. This isn't something you want to mess with. As much as I think the fears over using CO2 are probably overhyped, it can be dangerous. If you throw too much CO2 into a tank, your fish will suffer, and you don't want that to happen. So start slow and ramp up. Often we'll do things like using drop checkers. So a drop checker, I can't actually find any drop checkers, so I'm a bad aquarist myself, but I'm sure they're around here somewhere. They are a little device that you put in your aquarium, you fill it with some kind of solution which measures how much CO2 is going in. It'll usually go between blue and yellow and let you know whether you've added too much CO2. The really important part of that is it lets you know whether or not 2 hours ago or 3 hours ago your aquarium was using too much or too little CO2. So small adjustments, leaving it for hours before you make your next adjustment, is absolutely key, because it's a bit like a time machine. It tells you what was going on in the past rather than right now. That was a mistake I made early on. My first forays into CO2 was adding the drop checker oil, turning it up, going, well, that's still fine. Oh, that's still fine. And then it was only when I noticed all my fish gasping for air at the surface that I went, maybe something's not going quite to plan here. So be very careful about adding your CO2, but as long as you follow those rules of go slowly and go with little increments, you should be absolutely fine, and it should be not any kind of safety issue whatsoever. The only other thing we've not talked about yet is what we use to get from the bubble counter into the tank. You will see lots of actual CO2 tubing. It's fine, that's good to use as well. I have often used airline tubing, because that's also fine. If you use the cheapest of cheapest airline tubing, you might notice some loss, because the CO2 tubing is just basically thicker, so it's more pressure resistant and it will stop leakages from the pipe itself. But any decent airline seems to have been okay for me. CO2 tubing though, if you get it, if it comes with whatever system you've got, then you might as well use it. It's not going to be wrong. I like clear tubing because in the tanks it's a little bit more unobtrusive, and if I'm trying to make a nice aquascaped tank, I don't want to see lots of equipment in there. So that's something I would go for, whether it's CO2 or airline tubing, something that's clear or at least not going to be obtrusive in the tank. So as you can see, fairly inobtrusive on this tank. It's hidden behind a piece of wood. It's kind of what I wanted. And hopefully, I mean, I'm seeing okay growth now without CO2, but having added CO2, this should hopefully turbocharge it, if you like. It's not a one pill silver bullet solution to all your problems. It is another variable to light, nutrients. It's another thing to find a balance for, but used conservatively, I think it can only help. Just as a little update on this tank, I have put some inhabitants in there. We've got some LT grey endlers and a whole bunch of cherry shrimp, none of which I can see, but there is like 20 or 30 shrimp in there of all kinds of descriptions. There's some yellow shrimp, some black shrimp, some ghost shrimp, some all kinds of skittly shrimps in there, which we're doing a fantastic job on the algae as it starts to build up. But in terms of the endlers, I really quite like these guys. So we'll get a good colony of them too. I said you want to run it when the lights are on and not when they're off, is because CO2 builds up when the lights are off, and it gets used up when the lights are on. So the kind of optimal thing to do is to switch it on an hour before your lights come on and switch it off an hour before your lights go off. And then you should be set up to have the optimal flow. But as I say, any amount of extra CO2 when the lights are on is only going to be beneficial. I hope you found that useful. As I say, my number one tip for this is just to go slow and small increments when you're making changes. Please go and check out, the link will be in the description, Stevie P 2003's video on CO2. It's a fascinating subject. There's as much as you can possibly want to learn about, or as little as you want to learn about. There are different levels to approach this with, and just watching that video, it's like 15 minutes long, you'll find something in there that'll make you either think, yeah, I'm going to give this a go and know how to do it, or to go, yeah, I was right, I don't want to do that, I don't need to do that. It's got everything in there. It's the best video I've ever seen on CO2. So go and check that out, give him a like and a sub and all those good things. That's me. I'm just going to go around the fish room now and plug in the tanks that I want to have CO2 on them. Wish me luck. See you in the next one. Bye.